is aligned with our strategic priorities as a university?
I think that's a great question, Governor Barnhill, and I think in this context, it's aligned in multiple ways. One of the key components of that strategic plan is achieving financial stability over time and being able to flexibly market our excellent faculty and programs we have in a way that is easy and accessible for our employer community and drive revenue. It also helps us, and throughout the strategic plan, you'll see there's a lot of language in there about better partnering and working to better partner with the broader business community and employer community, and this will allow that as well. There's probably a few other ways, but this is going to be key when you get to the next presentation we're doing on budget reform, to finding ways to fully utilize our faculty to drive revenue. So I think in that way it aligns, and obviously if others of my colleagues have additional comments, I welcome them.
So I think I'd stress also that it aligns with the area where we talk about community impact. I mean, this will help us support workforce development better in the city and in the region. So when employers have specific needs for their employees or broadly to recruit employees in a specific area, we can put together a package in this way. Our College of Engineering has done a little of this in the past and is really eager to participate here, for example.
And if I may add on the economic and social mobility, I think this will allow us to get also for students to get and earn some of these credentials potentially faster, so they can get into the workforce faster than they waiting 2 years or 4 years, as we just talked earlier about that.
Okay, thank you. I see a request from Governor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you just provide an example of what this would look like?
So
how it works?
Sure, Governor Thompson. One example is, for example, what we're doing with the city of Detroit, where they play for their command staff, the members of the command staff that qualify to earn additional credentials along the way. Perhaps Ahmad, or as you'll be one of the people that's going to try to get out there and market this, you could give some other examples of things that we're doing.
Sure. So we can take the example that we talked about, the social work. So we may come up with a certificate in social work that could be completed in 1 year, and that would require to be priced either by program or by block. That will give us the flexibility beyond just the individual credit and that we currently have. That will make it easier and more appealing for both the employer, if the funding is coming from them, or for the students who are in these programs. There's a lot of examples now. We're looking into stackable credentials, certificates, bridge certificate that could lead eventually to a master's degree. These would be easier and more appealing to price that way. And candidly, competitively, we are going to need to do that because there are other institutions, local and outside of Michigan, who are offering these programs with these flexible pricing models. So this would be how we would do it. It allows us to do the same.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that I think David mentioned it, but I just wanted to reiterate it. We actually believe that we have the authority to do this now, and we've been doing it, but it's been in an ad hoc fashion. And we think that we're going to be doing this much more in the coming years, particularly because of the pandemic has shown that there's different types of certificates and things like that, different modes of learning that and different workforce needs that have come up that we want to take advantage of. So this will probably be something that will be more popular, and we just thought that we should formalize it rather than doing it in an ad hoc way.
I appreciate that. I think it's a good decision, Mr. President.
Yeah. Is there Okay, great. Yeah, I was just going to ask if there's any feedback from our faculty and student representatives on the committee. I see Mr. Thomas would like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question with regard to this model. I'm a big fan of alternative revenue streams and programs that are revenue generating. It looks like this is a good idea. My question is, since it appears in this document here that any budget and personnel implications will be reviewed by the provost and CFO, what criteria are you using to determine whether a program should be approved? Does it need to be revenue generating, for example?
For me, for my part, and then I'll let the provost speak to how he intends to review it. I think the financial part is a huge part, and part of formalizing this creates a workflow where we get to see it before it kind of works its way into the institution, which is why it's important. I won't say that you would only do this for profitable opportunities, but that would be a driving factor of whether or not it gets approved. But as an institution, there are numbers of ways that we provide value to the community, which may not result in a direct financial profit, but meet the needs of our institution. So for example, the Wayne State, I keep going back to the one kind of program that people have heard of, and DPD program isn't really a profit center for us, but it really is part and parcel of our mission to try to impact the community to raise those skills. And in those contexts, you want to make sure that we had identified in the existing budget a source to fund if there was a shortfall in terms of what the tuition would generate. But by and large, I would expect the programs that we would approve here would be revenue positive. And that's a big part of why we anticipate doing it. And that would be a big part of my review. So, Provost.
And on the academic side, we would certainly review this for the academic integrity of the program. So this has to be something that fits our quality brand, and and we would work through all the regular academic channels for anything that is new and different to make sure that the faculty are comfortable with this too.
It's also important to note that these would be reported to the board on a quarterly basis if any program we adopted, and therefore the board would have supervisory oversight of how this program develops.
Thank you.
All right, Professor Beal.
Yeah, you asked for, what faculty think about this, and this is actually something that the Senate is very supportive of, because in a way, it's almost like the idea of airline employees being able to take otherwise vacant seats on a plane. We sometimes have capacity that we're not really using fully. And if a program that meets academic and community needs can use that capacity well with just a small discount, you've actually really served the community, served the academic enterprise, and likely been able to generate revenues. So a wise step, I think, to be able to do that on a customizable basis, fairly clearly set out, so that faculty can even say, hey, this might be an opportunity for something like that. More likely to get innovative thinking around this, I think.
All right, great. Well, on that note, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the recommendation for a more formalized cohort-based tuition pricing model.
So moved.
Support.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, the ayes have it. So let's move on to the next item, budget rate.
So the next item is a presentation of some of the things that we've been talking about with the board about some foundational work we can do to improve the budget process. And I want to start with some expectation setting. A good budget process can help ensure that we're conforming to and investing in our strategic plan. It can help make sure that we're efficiently and proactively using our resources, but it doesn't create revenue and it doesn't solve problems on its own. So in terms of expectations, the budget process won't solve every problem that ails us financially, but hopefully improvements in our budget process and the foundational ways in which we address our budget can help the institution overall more proactively plan to do that. And before I get started, I do want to thank both Linda and Paul have given, as well as the Finance Committee, have given important feedback to me in terms of how better to implement this and how better to describe what we're implementing so that it's widely understood among our faculty partners. So the first thing that I'd like to focus on is, one of the things that we needed as an institution to do is get out of a reactive budget process to our financial problems into more proactive planning. And to do that, you need to build foundational expertise and foundational excellence around best practices for budgeting. That would also enable us to transition to, for example, something this board's familiar with, the RCM or some sort of similar model that allows for more incentive-based budgeting processes. We want to enable transparent access to consistent financial reporting across the board and not limited or differing assumptions going into the financial reporting that each unit learns. And then probably most importantly, we want to facilitate long-term planning and annual budget process. Governor Barnhill, you just asked a question on a program we had up, which is how does that program align to the strategic plan? And the idea really is, and the budget needs to be doing that just as much. And the only way you can align a budget to a strategic plan is to have a long-term look of the implications of a current year budget and what the future will bring. So, this is nothing new to anybody on this board. We've suffered with a structural deficit for many years, and each year we've solved it for that year, as opposed to trying to look a little bit more into the future so that our business units, our academic units, and non-academic units have an idea and a certainty of not only what this year is, but what the future years may bring as well. And then if we don't hit the assumptions in our long-term plan, have an understanding of the impacts of them. I just wanted to note one thing that is important. Raising tuition is one way to generate more revenue. And it's an important way of generating new revenue. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind as we look long-term, we have a mission in terms of social mobility, in terms of access to higher education. That means when we raise tuition, we necessarily have to increase financial aid because we have to provide access to the institution. And so it's not a dollar for dollar impact. If we raise tuition $1, it doesn't result in exactly $1 to our bottom line. And that's seen by the growing impact of the financial aid the institution has been granting. This is another chart that kind of illustrates those impacts. And by the way, please feel free to interrupt me as I go through this. I'm going to try to go quick so that there's time for robust conversation. The other thing we need to think about is if we hold solid at our current revenue picture, no matter what we do, our expenses grow. So, for example, if we're operating, say, 8 to 10 million in the red last year, that means in the coming budget year, the budget that starts in the fall, there's a minimum 13 million added on top of that in terms of shortfall. The biggest reason is, as an institution that educates and researches, our costs are our people, and our people every year have changes in their compensation. And as those go up, so go our costs. And then there are some unavoidable inflationary expenses around utilities and the like. The other issue that we face as an institution, Ahmad covered earlier, which is we've had over time a declining net tuition revenue. Some of that's because we've been successful. As we've increased student success and graduated students, you drive down tuition, and that's something we obviously should be doing. And some of that's because of demographics that exist in this state, and it's why we need to make efforts to continue to drive enrollment. The last thing that we're all aware of, the state appropriations haven't kept pace. I'm hopeful that our state leaders, with the windfall in revenue they have, see to it to increase our base appropriation. But I know that that's not a slam dunk by any means, and it will be a difficult legislative sledding. So this is a slide I put up just so people understand the impact of if we did nothing. Now, I want to say that this isn't realistic because it's not likely that there would be no increase in tuition and fees and rates over this period. But if we did nothing and we used our existing collective bargaining agreements and planned raises, in a 5-year period, we would have accumulated an $80 million deficit. So the reason I like to have the 5-year look is because it necessarily leads then to a 5-year forecast of enrollment to tuition assumptions and how that translates to financial stability. And what the plan is, and what I think we're committed to, the provost and myself, as well as our respective teams, is to bring to you, when we do the budget this summer, a chart that fills out and shows the assumptions we're making so that A, the board's aware of what we're assuming, and B, if we don't hit those assumptions, the board and ourselves can be held to account and to hold ourselves to account to make further changes to drive that financial sustainability. This is a chart that I like to keep because it gives an idea of what enrollment or tuition changes do with respect to our bottom line. And I did get a great question from the faculty about why, if we do 0 and 0, do we end up with a negative $3.7 million? That seems like we're being overly pessimistic. Well, it's because we used as a starting point for this chart the projections for enrollment. And when the budget was adopted and when we built this chart last year, the projection was for a decline in tuition and fees. So a 0 and 0 to what we had projected before results in a $3.7 million decrease. And I want to stop and pause here to say this chart is particularly important. One of the things we tried to do in this board meeting overall between the committees is coordinate this presentation with the one you're going to see next, which is where the provost and Ahmad are going to talk about enrollment strategies. And this chart will be part and parcel to driving that 5-year financial sustainability by taking those strategies and translating them to dollars. This is another chart that we're going to sign up to deliver. And again, part of the reason I'm showing this is I think giving the board, the collective community, an opportunity to comment on what we're going to provide in the summer before we get to the budget hearing is important. So this is something else we're signing up to do. And when we present the budget to you, you'll get from us a chart like this that should show at the end of that 5-year period that we operate sustainably in the black. A few these are very technical points, but these are important points that are going to operate to take a lot of our staff. And candidly, this is why I'm going to advocate that we adopt the budget in the summer to give our budget staff time to actually work on making some of these changes. We need to analyze, as we move forward, the current base budget applications to better align to the budget. I know that sounds like an odd statement, but right now our budgets often have positions that exist that units have appropriately directed towards other items that are necessary for operations. And we want the budget to reflect reality so we understand what reality is from a financial standpoint. We want to establish a regularized, centralized budget monitoring process so every unit is operating from the same place. We wanted to institute a more transparent position control process so we understand when dollars were intended for people are deployed for people, and we do it on an institution-wide basis. And as I said, we want to reestablish a timeline for the June budget and tuition rate approval. As we move through the year, we want to build out this multi-year planning process. We want to formalize it. We want to work with the provost's office so that we understand our assumptions. And then we want to make sure that our budget over a 5-year horizon looks like and reflects the strategic plan that this board, as well as the university community as a whole, has worked on. These are some additional kind of technical changes that we want to make. I think most importantly, over this next year and going into next year, we want to get to establishing a current funds budget model. And why that's important, I think I can point across the administration to differing units about transparency and understanding of the enterprise, but maybe most reflective of is a School of Medicine, where the general fund is maybe a quarter of the total budget. So the general fund budget reflects 50 million. The actual operations of the school are in excess of 290 million. We want to bring that all together so that when we make decisions on the general fund or otherwise, everybody understands how we're most efficiently using all of the university resources, and they're brought to bear in a way that reflects our long-term needs. And finally, we want to create reports and dashboards so they're accessible. The RCM model, all the different budget reform models that I've seen in my career require one very important thing, and that is the people who are making decisions, whether that be at the management level or the faculty that are implementing it on the ground, they need to understand the implications of those decisions. So we need to do a better job as a unit of providing that information and creating reports and dashboards that are, again, consistent across the units, obviously taking into account the differing modalities each of those units have, and the uniqueness of those units can help further those ends. In 23, the other big thing that I'll highlight here is focusing on our tuition and fees model and making sure that we build into our regular budgeting process a robust review of that we do with, obviously the provost and his team's input and faculty's input to make sure that our tuition and fees model reflects what it should reflect, which is, our long-term strategic plan, financial sustainability, but also that we're not creating barriers to access that don't result in necessary financial gain for the institution. And with that, I'm happy to take discussions. There's a quick budget timeline. I think the important part for the board is that we're going to try to hit that June meeting if at all possible. So with that, I can take discussion if people have any.
All right,
David, could you send this to us, please, so we could have it for future reference?
It will not only be sent to you, it will be posted, I believe, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, to the website once we're through with this meeting.
Governor Kelly?
Yes, I think this is very interesting and encouraging, Vice President Masseron. I appreciate it. Did I understand correctly from your statistics there that you are anticipating a budget from the state government of less than the inflationary rate again next year?
Anticipating is a tough word, Governor Kelly. I think what we're doing is looking at the past history and projecting that forward and being necessarily conservative. I am hopeful, and I know if Patrick's on, I'm hopeful that the institution is able to achieve more than that and higher ed is able to achieve more than that. That being said, there is a reluctance at the state at times to what I think is make a necessary investment in higher ed. So right now we are anticipating less than inflation. Obviously inflation last year was particularly high. So if we were able to do that, that would be great. But I don't know that that's reality based. And I think we're going to have to watch as the state progresses through its budget cycle over the summer to see where we end up.
Yeah, I think the general public should know that we're being funded at less than the rate of inflation. I hope we find a way to get that message out.
Yeah, I think less than the rate of inflation is a generous way of describing how the state has funded us. I think it's probably been worse than that. I don't think we've yet recovered from the cuts during the Snyder administration that were instituted on this institution. So we're not only less than inflation, we're not caught up to where I think we should be.
All right, so looks like we're getting some action here. So I'm just going to call people in the order that I see them on my screen. So we're going to go Governor Kumar, then we'll go to Mr. Thomas. Then is this Governor Basuito?
Yes.
Okay, and then Professor Beal.
Yeah, this is Anil Kumar. I don't have a question. I just have a comment and an applaud for David. You've done a fantastic job in both doing the job and being able to explain to us and to give us the presentations that I really feel very comfortable and confident with the budget committee, what the budget committee is doing in your work. So thank you very much. Please keep the work going.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Rolanda and Tamika are on, who did and do most of the work, and Professor Kornblue and his team have provided a considerable amount of input to this.
All right, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vice President Masseron, just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I agree with what one of my colleagues on the board said earlier. This is encouraging. Multi-year budgeting is a best practice. Centralized budget monitoring sounds like a very, very good idea. Wanted to provide two suggestions. I saw on the PowerPoint that you're presenting that there's going to be a review. There's a budget steering committee was mentioned, and then there was a review of some of those strategic initiatives. I'd like to implore the board and implore anyone in charge of this review process to obtain student input. Students and their parents are particularly impacted by the university's budget and by tuition and fees, which are a primary or principal source of revenue. So their input is indispensable. So I just wanted to thank you for that and implore
I can guess whose phone that is, but I won't.
Yeah, I think, David, that our process always includes student input. So I think that was you probably didn't state it, but I can assure you, Mr. Thomas, that's part of our process all the time. Very important. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Governor Masuda.
David, I want to thank you again. I think that your approach of being so proactive is a breath of fresh air for us. Is there a formula in place to determine what percentage of the general budget goes to the different schools and colleges and the university?
A formula, I think, might be a strong word. I think that, all of the institutions have existing costs, and the budgets are built off the last year's budget. So I'm not sure that it's formulaic. I think during RCM, there was an attempt to build out an algorithm that would effectively do that. I'd say I want to pause before I fully answer that question and let Tamika and Rolanda talk a little bit about the historic nature, since it predates me in prior years. But I don't believe there's a formalized formula about how that works. But we do build from existing costs for no other reason than obviously costs are built in to the operational unit. So you can't really just move the money quickly or freely without kind of pretty big impacts.
Yeah, David, I think you said it exactly. It's really been based on an incremental model. So, maybe decades ago, there could have been some base formula that got us to that point. But from year to year, because we're in this incremental model, unfortunately, that's the primary driver outside of any one-time needs that are identified as we move forward each year.
Thank you. Professor Beal?
Yeah, I wanted to express on behalf of the Academic Senate our appreciation for the way that the CFO and the provost have worked on this idea of reforming the budgets. These things in terms of all funds budgets and multi-year planning are both issues that the Senate has considered really important for budgeting and pushed for several years. So we're delighted to see it having a real potential to come into place with coordination with academic planning. It's just seems essential for long-term viability of the institution. So we appreciate that. I would like also to add that one of the things we see as really important, and this is not something that is really within Dave's shop, but can affect the performance, especially in terms of persuasion of the state. And I know that we're working very hard on that. But from the Senate's viewpoint, we see it as really important that the state meaning the legislators, the executives in the state, the people in the state, understand the importance of higher education, and particularly the role that the Wayne State faculty and academic programs play in contributing to the state. And I think this is often not well understood, and to be honest, perhaps not enough focused on in terms of the academic core of the enterprise in most of our marketing. So it's just one aspect of this long-term planning that I hope we can emphasize in the future.
If I could just speak briefly, and certainly I appreciate Professor Bill's comments. It is a very complex political issue relative to the value of higher education by our legislature. Because of term limits, our legislature is always churning, and we're always educating, not only on the value of higher ed overall, but its economic impact to the state and its importance. And your message is well taken, and it's a very high priority for my team in Lansing. In fact, David will be joining my team in Lansing specifically next week in that educational process. So thank you.
Yeah, Patrick scheduled me to go up there on Groundhog's Day, which I don't know if he did on purpose or as a joke.
Very funny.
You're the groundhog. I would just add to that, if I could, both for Patrick and David, that you know, if to the extent possible, I think using faculty as well, so that legislators have a chance to meet the people that are the core of the academic enterprise and speak with them, both faculty and students, in ways that help the legislators really understand the nature of the academic enterprise and the kinds of inquiry and the kinds of things we offer, I think can be really positive.
We agree, Professor Bill, and we actually have several lobby day activities that we do bring students and faculty to Lansing, and we will look for increased opportunities to do so. Thank you.
And Patrick, you also bring legislators to campus, which I think is probably one of the best ways for people to see our value.
Thumbs up on that one.
All right, Professor Beavers.
I wanted to add that I'm particularly pleased with the more analytical look that David and the provost are going to be taking at tuition income. Going back to conversations I remember having with Rebecca Cook, looking at the levels of discount, the various levels of tuition paid by not just graduate students and undergraduate students, but in specific programs, is going to give us a much clearer idea. And I think it's actually going to involve presentations within the budgets that will be easier to follow, and decision making it is easier to understand. So I wanted to congratulate you on that as well.
All right. Is there any more discussion on this? Let's move on to the next item on the agenda.
I'll just say, in closing on that, I do want expectations that reform is painful and messy. So as we do it, there'll be progress and then there'll be room for improvement. So I want expectations that I love the positive feedback, but this is going to be a multi-year effort that's going to be both exhilarating in its promise for change, but also painful.
I just want to add one thing, if I may. I'm really excited about the fact that finally we are putting a budgeting process in place that mirrors our strategic planning process. We do strategic planning for 5 years and typically do a budget year to year to year. Now you're talking about doing it for 5 years. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it, David.
Thank you. All right, so the next item, real quickly, Rob, are you on?
I am on. Yes,
All
thank
right.
you, David, and good morning, everybody. I'll touch on three projects briefly, and that would be State Hall. Design development is complete. Construction documents are in development now, and those documents will be released once complete in April. As I've mentioned before, we will return to the board in March for funding on long lead items, such as HVAC equipment and roofing materials in particular. Those two things are experiencing long lead times. And then we'll return again in June for funding for the entire project. On Gateway Hillberry, the project will be substantially complete in the middle of December this year. And regarding the art building HVAC project, and this is in connection also with the art complex cooling restoration, you might recall. Comprehensive mechanical design combining both initiatives is about 65% complete. Once that design is complete, we will, of course, develop the construction documents and take those documents out to bid. A temporary cooling design for the upcoming cooling season has been determined. So we will provide more information on what that will look like for the community arts, art, and McGregor buildings. And then finally, regarding deferred maintenance and projects in the pipeline, we will have a comprehensive report to present to the board in March. Any questions?
And I have a quick one. In March, when you come back to us, would you please bring the whole list, even things that aren't quite into the planning stages, or just so that we have an idea of what the next year and anything new coming up will look like?
Absolutely. That's what we, in fact, refer to as the pipeline. So.
Oh, that's the pipeline. Okay.
Intervention, yes. So
you're speaking in code. I didn't.
That's yeah, I'll excuse for that.
Great. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, let's move on to the next item. Purchasing.
Ken?
Let me share my my face and share my microphone. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me today. So you've got the purchasing exceptions report. It's longer than I would have liked it to have been. There's 69 total purchase orders. As I say in that first page, again, what we report on is, for this particular report, is any purchasing exceptions for the months of October and November of 21. In a nutshell, there are 69 items or purchases on the report for about $9.4 million. The first 11 are things the board is typically seeing, each and every report, because it's always led off with those items based upon scientific judgment. And there's 11 items in there. That's followed by a handful of medium-sized consulting engagements. And then in the emergency section, there's about 5 medium-sized orders as well. Most of them related to building maintenance, and 2 of those specifically tied back to the June 2021 flood that we all know and are anxious to forget. In the compatibility section, and again, this is why a big part of why the report is so lengthy. Each year when we end one fiscal year and start out another fiscal year, the way purchase orders are funded on an annual basis, we wind up with a lot of orders that are ongoing type orders. So there were 31 purchase orders in this section worth about $3.5 million. And again, this is typical year to year, but it creates a bump in the previous report and in this report. In the partnership section, you'll notice that there's about $3 million, but related to Wayne Health, almost all of it, and there's 5 purchase orders in there. Beyond that, I know you've got the report in front of you, and I will just open it up for any questions that you may have.
Yes, Governor Thompson.
Hi, good morning. I had a question about numbers 43 and 44 on the report, and it's for Allentown LLC. And the previous POs were much lower. And it looks like there are two that are, the one for 43 is twice the amount, and then there's a separate one. It looks like it's for exactly the same thing. So just wondering about that substantial increase for this.
Yeah, and it's a good question, so thank you for that question. Unlike some things like annual license renewals, this is a build out of some of the physical cage structures over in the Department of Laboratory Animal Resources. So whatever it was that they chose to renovate or upgrade here was just of a larger size. Separate purchase orders are generally because the individual index being charged for the equipment is separate, although I don't have the orders in front of me. There could be other underlying reasons for that. But if you like, because I don't know the particulars, unless Dr. Lanier is aware of it, I can reach out to Antonio Yancey or to the DLAR itself and get more information and provide that, back to the board.
Yes, thank you. That would be very helpful. And these are for animals that are being used for research or testing? Or?
This is actually for the infrastructure, the caging that's used to house the animals. But yes, it's the animals that are used for research.
Okay. Yes, thank you. If you could provide more information.
Absolutely. I'll get more information for you.
Governor Kelly? Governor Kelly, I see you have your hand raised.
Are you muted, maybe? I'm sorry. You indicated that purchase orders that run over the end of the fiscal year have to be reauthorized by the board. Is that correct?
That wasn't what I was saying. I apologize if that was confusing the way I put that. The way the university does its funding, if I have an ongoing relationship where year after year I use the same services I used the previous year, I have to issue a new purchase order each year so that it ties to the correct fiscal year funding. Now, long-term contracts that are competitively bid aren't showing up on this report. What you see on this report is where we have, like the one with the DLAR, where they have sort of standardized on using the Allentown cages. So anytime they go back and use more Allentown cages without a competitive bid, it would be on this report. If I tie back to, let me just glance at another example. In the Illumina on number 38, you'll see where they just have made, year after year, they set up a purchase order with Illumina for some of the samples and reagents that they buy. And so each year when they issue a new purchase order, unless they give me a multi-year bid waiver request and I can report the full long-term plan, I simply have to put it on the report each year. And I do try to work with departments and encourage them to give me a bigger picture so that I can give the board a bigger picture when I have it of what the actual spending plans are.
Thank you. How many purchase exceptions did we have on the January agenda in 2021?
I don't have that number. I could get that for you.
Do you recall whether it was as many as this?
I know, yes, it would be very comparable to this.
Okay. It's a lot for us to try to digest and make a meaningful vote on. So if there's any way that they could be distributed over the year any better, I would appreciate it. I recognize it might not be possible, but if it is, it would be a service to us, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I know these are very, very large reports and a lot of information, but the information is just because we're trying to make it very clear what's taking place.
And Governor Kelly, this is an informational report of transactions that have occurred. There's no vote.
Okay.
There's no needed for this.
Thank you.
All right, so that being the last item on the agenda, I'm going to close by saying, this has really been one of the best finance committee meetings I've participated in. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we've taken actions and engaged in discussion around items that align with our strategic priorities and discussions as a board and as members of this Canvas community. It's very evident that there's been collaboration across the various spheres that the cabinet members are overseeing. There's been engagement with the faculty, and I'm really happy we have Zachary's approval on a lot of the stuff too. So let's keep it up. And good work to President Wilson, our CFO, and the rest of the team.
President Wilson, we have a 5-minute break. The next committee would